Well, hello. I am so thrilled to have my friend Tony Miltenberger here with me today, you guys. Tony is a speaker, he's a pastor, he's an Army vet, exec coach, author of Wisdom in the Wound, which actually comes out today. He's married to his high school sweetheart of 20 years, father of three, and he's a podcaster too. For this audience, a point of reference that might be helpful for you guys, GSCC listeners, Tony's podcast is called the Follow2Lead Podcast. It is a part of the That Sounds Fun network, of which Amy F. Downs is a co-founder, whose name I'm sure many of y'all recognize. But I was fortunate to be featured as a guest on Tony's podcast earlier this summer, where we spoke about balancing faith, coaching, and parenthood through a conversation on overwhelm, vulnerability, and purposeful living. That is episode number 408 on the Follow to Lead podcast if you'd like to check it out. And what I especially appreciate about Tony, it's his gift for connection and helping others to see how God uses your past to shape who you're becoming. So if you have ever wrestled with pain or disappointment or failure and wondered if anything good could come from it, Tony's latest book, Wisdom in the Wound, is for you. What I particularly personally love about this book is that it invites readers to rethink their wounds as not as setbacks, but really as sacred starting points for transformation. So this is a perspective, it's critical to growth, and it's an ideal read, you guys, for anyone who's seeking clarity or courage and deeper perspective, which I know is so many of you who listen to this podcast. So without further ado, let's get started. Tony, welcome to the Grace-Based Christian Coaching, Building a Faith First Life and Business podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor. I love your work and I love your heart for what you're doing for so many leaders in so many different spaces and places. So it's an honor and a privilege to be here today and to talk to your tribe.
Amazing. Well, we're thrilled to have you here. So, Tony, for the listeners who aren't familiar with you, will you tell us a bit more about what makes you you?
I'm a little crazy. No, um, one of the beautiful things is I've had the privilege of living a pretty diverse life, and so I haven't been in ministry my whole life. I wasn't in the army my whole life. I've got that kind of entrepreneurial spirit that I know a lot of your listeners have, and so I get a little jumpy, and so we joke all the time. My wife and I do that. We've been married. It'll be 23 years in February, and she's had one job in 23 years, and I think I've had 23. And so I love to start, and I like big risks. And like you said, I love connecting people to people. It's really an incredible thing to watch when the Lord interweaves people's lives together, and something that you could have never imagined comes from that.
Best. Yeah. Well, y'all know this is the Grace-Based Christian Coaching Podcast, so I thought I'd kick us off by starting chatting on coaching for a little bit here, if that sounds good to you.
Love it.
Tony, what would you say is one of the stories that you are most proud of as an executive coach?
Yeah, I was working with this incredible executive who felt so overwhelmed with the work that he was doing and his marriage. And he had two teenage girls, and he felt like he wasn't being present for all of them. Right. And you and I talked about balance on my podcast. And it's one of those things where he couldn't see something because he was in it so deep. And so we started talking about what his priorities were and what that looks like. And we started talking about his values and whatever his values based on. And we created this kind of value statement for him that was like, hey, these are my core four values, and this is how I live them out. And then we started to build practices in place to give him full permission to live that way. And uh, what ended up being a new employee as an executive assistant, it freed up his time in such a way that he could do deeper, more meaningful work in less actual time, because all of the things that he was doing that were like side work, right? So get up early, respond to a bunch of emails, stay up late, respond to a bunch of emails. And that value change or identification really changed everything. And so I was super humbled and honored to be a part of that kind of work in this particular leader's life.
That's fantastic. I really loved how you had said coming up with values and then practices based on those values, right? It makes what might feel messy or complex simple. Nice. Well, what's one thing too? So, and I'm sure you have a few there with all the different clients I have, some favorite tools, resources, perspectives that they just love and adore. Most of the GSCC listeners are resource junkies. So, in that vein, Tony, what would you say? What's one thing that you share with most of your coaching clients that would bless listeners here too?
It's a tool that God gave me a couple years ago. It's connected to the book, but I was using it far before the book ever got here, right? So
Mhm.
it's called the emotional intensity scale.
Mm.
And so one of the things that I challenge leaders on all the time, and I'm sure you do as well, is to slow down and make decisions that are intentional and not reactionary. So I always say, like, you can be emotionally reactive or you can be intentionally responsive. And
Mm.
so I want leaders to be intentionally responsive. In other words, bring your feelings along for the ride, but let's not let them drive.
Yeah.
Don't let them drive those tough decisions. And so the tool that I give people is called an emotional intensity scale. It's my favorite tool by far. And what the intensity scale kind of says is that on a scale from 1 to 10, anytime your emotions spike above a 6, it's always more about you than it is the other person. In other words, no one can make you feel a certain way. You have to choose to feel that way, that you're 100% responsible for how you think, feel, and act. So when you're spiked above a 6, then what I challenge leaders to do is kind of put themselves in timeout. Feel your feelings, take a step back, practice solitude, as John Mark Comer would say. Take some time to just power down so that you can respond in alignment with your values, mission, and vision, and not just have an emotional reaction. And that emotional intensity scale, it's the thing that probably sticks around the most because people are always like, Tony, I was above a 6 today, but I didn't type that email out. Or like, I was above a 6 today and I didn't respond that way. And so the thing is when you're above a 6, there's just not very much good that can come from that. And so power down, reset, and make a decision that's in alignment with where you feel like God is actually calling you to be.
Well said. That is going to minister to a lot of people, myself included, today. Thank you for that. It's great. So we've got a lot of great gems that we'll unpack in a moment here. But one more as we think about coaching, let's say, chatting on it in a different way now, Tony. I love how in your book, In Wisdom in the Wound, you share that, quote, questions empower you to take ownership of your faith and your decisions. What would you say is one of the most powerful questions that you've asked or been asked?
Great question. I would say one of my favorite tools and one of my favorite questions is what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Yeah.
When you can pause and ask people that you love, especially for an honest reflection of how I show up in a room, it can change the perspective at which you see yourself. Oftentimes we have either rose colored glasses or some of us have a personality type where we've got even worse, like we think we're the worst all the time. So kind of a degrading kind of lens on how we see ourselves. But that idea that if I can ask people who love me, who have grace and truth, who are value aligned, what's it like to be on the other side of me? Then I'll get feedback that I can never get in other ways.
Absolutely. That's such a solid one. And a favorite for a lot of my clients too, similar but slightly different. The way we'll ask it is, what is it like to experience me?
That's good.
Good, right? So, okay, in your book, you talk about, quote, acknowledging the existence of wounds. And we love so much just mention a good resource, a good exercise. And so as we're thinking about this here, you guys, he recommends naming your wound with a one sentence description. Brilliant. And then naming how the wound shows up in your life. So, I mean, honestly, if y'all just hit pause or stopped the episode here, I think this would wildly benefit you. But if we were to go deeper here, share with us, Tony, what's one way that someone can begin identifying the wounds that are influencing their lives?
One of the things that I think is really important for all of us to do is when we have big feelings, we need to trace those feelings back to when we first felt them. And so a question that I often use when I'm coaching a client in this wound identification process is, when is the first time that you felt that way? and really spend some time tracing that idea back. Trace it all the way back to the beginning. Most of our wounds happen somewhere between the ages of 4 and 12, right? They happen, and the wounds, the way that I use them for just for clarity's sake, is it's called little t trauma. And so they're the kind of wounds that nobody did to you on purpose. So I haven't met someone that doesn't have a wound. We would say it's a result of, big church word, epistemic consequence of sin. In other words, the brokenness of the world. Everyone's willing to admit that the world is broken, but very rarely do we talk about the consequences of that brokenness. What does brokenness actually look like in the world? Like, how does it impact things? And so that's the wounding that I'm talking about. And so as you begin to have this emotional experience, this intense emotional feeling, my challenge to you would be to trace it all the way back and then start to look for patterns. Do we have patterns around when this happens? Does it happen when I feel like I'm in chaos? Does it happen when I feel like I'm in disorder? Or does it happen when I feel like someone's leaving me or being disloyal, or when I don't feel like I matter to someone? And that's, as you can begin to see those patterns, especially if you take the courageous step of actually writing them out, you'll begin to see the wound clearer and clearer. And as I say, you'll kind of get to know the edges.
So for the person who feels like they don't have time to process their feelings, what would you share with them?
I would say this, is that if you don't handle your emotions, eventually your emotions will handle you. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be able to live an interruptible life. Jesus modeled this. And so there's nothing in your life as important as your mental health. And your kids need that, and your spouse needs that, and all the places that you show up need that. And so in times of extra busyness, you have to work extra hard at doing nothing. And by nothing, I really mean just sitting, practicing solitude. I schedule it. Right now, especially with the book launch and all the things that come with that. And of course, I still have my coaching practice, and at the church, I'm spending extra amounts of time in the morning by myself doing nothing so that I can get my mind right. The truth is, for so many of us, nobody wakes up and says, man, today is the day that I want to ruin my life. Right? Today's the day that I want to ruin my marriage or make my kids resent me, or like all of these kind of things that end up happening. But what we do is we sacrifice the disciplines that keep us in a healthy space. And because of that, we end up drifting off course. Disciplines aren't things to do. They're things that help us be.
Disciplines aren't things we do. They're things that help us be. Yeah. So you share that wounds usually form between the ages of 4 and 12 and form how we see the world. And in some ways, personally, I got to say that's comforting, because in full transparency, my littles are 4 and under, all 3 of them right now. So hopefully we haven't messed up anything too much yet. But on the other hand, that feels like a lot of pressure that we are about to step into. So for listeners who might have kids, let's say in this 4 to 12 age range, what would you offer to them as they look to parent as effectively as possible in this formative window?
Just know that your kids are going to come out wounded, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Grace, so much grace. Now, they probably won't be wounded in the same way that you're wounded. You're going to work really hard at that, right? And so you're going to work really hard at not wounding them the same way that you were wounded, but in the process, you're going to give them another wound. And that's the essence of brokenness. So because of that, we can have a little bit more grace. Like, hey, you're doing the best you can with what you have, but on this side of heaven, everyone's wounded. And so the reality is teaching them how to deal with their emotions and modeling how to deal with your own brokenness is the best gift that you can give your kids so that they can become resilient Christian leaders or whatever God calls them to. That's the process, is not that I'm going to try to prevent this. Instead, I'm going to try to model what good health looks like. And I think Jesus did that for the disciples, taking time in the garden to pray before the crucifixion, all the different practices that he did in solitude and in intentionality, he modeled behavior that kept him in a healthy place.
Yeah, as you were sharing there, you used the word resilient, and it makes me think about how, in your book, you talk about part of what you do is to help people regulate emotional intensity. And honestly, I gotta say, it feels like a secret weapon in some ways, in these days where tension and distraction and comparison run high. So, what would you say, Tony, are 2 to 3 things that you would suggest to someone who wants to grow in this area of regulating emotional intensity?
So, one of my favorite things is knowing that motion changes emotion. So,
Mm.
moving your body matters. And we oftentimes think that it doesn't, but motion changes emotion, and sleep really matters, right? And so being intentional about your sleep patterns and what that looks like. And one of the things we say all the time on the podcast is that if you aren't dedicated to your disciplines, you'll be destroyed by your distractions. And so start to develop a morning routine and an evening routine so that you can get the life that you desire. And as long as it's working, keep doing it. And when it doesn't work, change it. And so I challenge people all the time to set a date to evaluate. Like, put a date on your calendar. Maybe it's 6 months from now. Maybe it's 3 months from now. My wife and I like to check in quarterly and just ask the question, are the practices in our life getting us to what we desire? If the answer is yes, just keep doing them. If the answer is no, then we begin to shift. And we do so without judgment or shame. You're not going to stay the same. The disciplines that are serving you well now will not serve you well later because you are growing in the faith, you're growing in life, you're growing in maturity, your kids are growing. And so I got a bunch of teenagers now. Our life is completely different. And praise God for that. And also, I've never had teenagers before. So it's different, and it's one of those things where we're like, hey, how do you feel like we're doing? I feel like we're doing okay. Do you feel like we're doing okay? And we just talk about what's working, what's not, what might need to shift, money, physical activity, spiritually, all of those things. And then we make adjustments and we're unapologetic about it.
Awesome. So, shifting gears here for a second, you invite readers in your book to consider how your gifts might be related to your wounds. So, will you share with us, Tony, an example of how this rings true for you?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
My wounding comes from having unplanned twins. My parents are wonderful humans. They didn't do anything to me. They didn't do anything wrong. But at 4 years old, my parents had unplanned twins, taking me from the youngest to the middle. And in that process, one of the things that kind of just happened was that I felt like I didn't matter, that I wasn't seen. And so I would say that my wounding is that I don't oftentimes feel seen. My parents would later go on to get divorced and remarried, and they all are wonderful people. And I love my brother and sister, wouldn't trade a thing. No one did this to me. But because of the brokenness that exists in the world, I oftentimes feel like I'm not seen. It only makes sense, right? I would pick a career path that would put me in front of a microphone or on a platform. I put myself in positions to be seen all the time. But here's the crazy thing. Because we serve a God who specializes in redemption, right? What 2 Corinthians 5 would talk about, the ministry of reconciliation. Christ reconciled his wounds so that we might practice that same message of reconciliation, to be an ambassador for Christ, 5:20, 2 Corinthians 5:20. And in that process, our wounds are redeemed. And so while I oftentimes feel like I'm not seen, my unique gift in the world, the thing that I do really well, is I see people. And I believe from the depth of my heart that that's true for everyone listening, that whatever wounding you have in the world, maybe that wounding is that you grew up in chaos, and so you're really good at order. Maybe that wounding is you felt like you have to perform in order to receive love, and yet you're really good at holding responsibility. We all have a gift because God is such a creative, redemptive God who meets us in our darkest hours and does something with that to rebuild the kingdom.
Preach. The pastoral coming out there.
It comes. I'm sorry. It's like passing the offering plate. Let's go. I get excited.
We need that. So, as we're thinking about emotion, an emotion that comes up, right, when we have wounds, you mentioned this idea of emotional truth questions, which is so powerful in your book. Share more with us about this.
Yeah, I notice this a ton, especially in married couples, is we tend to get caught up in the details, what I would call the physical truth versus the emotional truth. The emotional truth gives us permission to share our story without sharing the nitty gritty details. So, for example, I had to recently, my wife went and visited my son at college, and I didn't get to go because of some opportunities and obligations that I had here. And so, in that moment, I can tell you all about how my wife went and go visit him and how the trip was. I can share all of the physical details, what time her flight was, when she got back, or I can just say, man, I recently had to deal with some jealousy and resentment because I miss my son so much. And I'm really happy that my wife got to squeeze his neck and just tell him how much she loves him for us. But I was really sad that I didn't get to go. Same story, completely different power, authenticity, intimacy, and how we tell it. Emotional truth, when we share it, gives us a window into someone's soul so much deeper than just the physical truth. The physical truth is great for police reports, but it's horrible for building intimacy.
So powerful and so true. And speaking of truth, I'm reminded as was reading your book and processing here how God was shared with Moses and really reminded him that leadership ultimately it's not about perfection, but about obedience and faith. And so, what would you suggest for listeners who desire to operate in faithful obedience consistently?
So one of the things that I would recommend is to surround yourself with other faithful people, right? The counsel of the godly is a term that I use pretty regularly. And so I want to surround myself with people who can help keep me on track. The other thing that I think is critically important is that we have to continually be checking in with God on what our calling is, what our actions is, what our yeses, what our nos. We really should create space or margin in our lives so that we can get the right yeses and the right nos. So surrounded by people who can make those decisions with us and giving the right yeses and the right nos through prayer is all about obedience. And so one of the things that's just true is that if we're responding to all the things that are going on inside of us emotionally, then we can't respond to the Lord intentionally. So if emotions are Lord of our life, Jesus can't be. So again, all of these things go back to building a life full of intentional rhythms, practices, disciplines that keep us in a place that say, here I am, Lord, send me. And I can hear you because the noise in my own life is not under control because we'll probably never control it, but it's in the right box, so to speak.
Tony, so we covered a lot of ground today. What else would you say that listeners need to know, hear about, or be encouraged towards that we haven't covered already?
One of the things that I just believe to be true in this process is that a lot of us approach this work with cultural theology, meaning theology that was given to us through the culture or through our family. Again, no one's fault. No one did it to us on purpose. But the reality is somewhere along the way, we were taught it's not okay to feel, or it's not okay to respond. It's not okay to be emotionally big, or like for me, I'm a guy, so it's not okay for me to be a drama queen, even though I am a drama queen, right? Like I've got big emotive feelings. And so the thing is when we keep things in the dark, they have power over us. When we bring them to the light, they have a lot less power. When we surrender them to God, they have a lot less power. They have a lot less ability to impact us. So the wisest leaders that I know, the ones who I see and I read about, they don't have an absence of wounding, but they have an intimacy with it. They're so familiar with their wounds that it doesn't scare them, that they're not embarrassed by them. They don't judge them or shame them. They just know, hey, this is part of my story. This is how God redeemed it. And this is who I am. And so I think that there's probably a leader listening who, as they think about their wound, they immediately want to beat themselves down about it. I shouldn't do that, or I wish I wouldn't have that way, or I wish I couldn't, blah, blah, blah. And let me just encourage you. Shame and judgment are not fruits of the Spirit. That is not what God desires for you. He wants you to have joy and love and hope and peace. He wants you to be okay with being you because He's okay with you. And I think that's an important message that all Christian leaders, all leaders need to hold on to, especially in a season of Instagram and Facebook. It's so easy to get lost in that comparison trap. So just hold on to it with two hands. Don't let go. You're broken. It's okay. We need you still. Don't judge. Don't have shame. Enjoy hope and peace.
Tony, thank you. What a privilege it was to have this conversation. There's so much wisdom packed into your words, your reflections here. I know it was a blessing to me and will be to listeners too. So as they look to learn more, what will you tell them? Share with us when and where they can get their hands on a copy of Wisdom in the Wound.
Well, it's available on Amazon right now for, I guess as this comes out, it'll be available today for order. And we're so excited. So you can go to Amazon.com and, of course, just type in Wisdom in the Wound. Or you can go to my website, wisdominthewoundbook.com. From there, there's links to my coaching practice, my podcast, all the different things. You should go listen to episode 408 for sure. And there's so many blessings in your community. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. And I hope and pray that as you hold the book in your hand, God does something inside of you to help you continue to grow in your own leadership.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Tony, for everything you had to offer in the way in which you share your message in a way that honors and glorifies God too. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.